Hey, so I'm backstage here at the Trees in Dallas, and I wanted to address the very controversial statements made by CM Punk on the Colt Cabana podcast. If you haven't heard it, go check it out. It's very, very, revealing, I guess you'd say. And Punk had some things to say about me. And I'll preface that by saying that Punk and I are very good friends. I always consider him to be one of my better friends in the wrestling business. Close the door there. So I was a little surprised by what he said, although I hadn't talked to him in a long time, since February. But the one thing is, I'd never asked him to do my podcast after he quit the WWE. I did ask him to do the podcast, that is true, but it was back in December when I first started. We actually even had a date planned, December 18th, to do the podcast. I was going to be in a studio in Tampa, call him, and then he pulled out. He said he didn't have anything good to say about wrestling, wasn't excited about wrestling. I was like, well, let's just talk about comic books or whatever, and he didn't want to do it, so that was cool. And after he left the WWE in February, I texted him a few times to ask how he was doing and see what's up. Never once, not once, did I ever ask him to do. Sorry about that. Looks like the clip got cut off, but I never once asked him to do the podcast after he left the WWE in February. In January, the WWE asked him if he wanted to do my podcast because I had given them a list of names of guys that I wanted, going through the protocol, going through the office, and once again, he wasn't into doing the podcast, which is cool. But yeah, after he left in February, I just sent him a couple texts about different things, really nothing to do with wrestling. So that's kind of the deal. I think other people might have been prodding him to try and get information from him, but I never did that. I never asked him to do the podcast after he left the WWE in February. So, but still, have no ill will towards Punk. Still consider him to be a close friend, and went through some wars with the guy. And I'll explain all of this more on Talk is Jericho this Wednesday with former and maybe possibly future AC/DC drummer Chris Slade. So thumbs up to Punk. I'm glad he got to vent, but I definitely did not have an agenda because I never asked him to do the podcast after he left the WWE, nor did I ever ask him any questions about why he left. That was his business and his business only, but I kind of had some feelings of why he did it because I went through the same thing in 2005 when I left the WWE for 2.5 years. So I'll explain all of this and much more on Talk is Jericho this week.